My connection to the river goes pretty far back. I grew up in North Delta and spent many days recreating along the river as a child. I started working in the estuary about 15 years ago, and as a consultant, a lot of my work has been right here in the Fraser, and it really is where my heart is. My crew and myself are going out with a beach seine, and we're looking at what fish are using different tidal marshes all over the estuary, some of which have been constructed in the past, some of which are just natural marshes, to look at how fish usage may differ between different marsh types. We know that as juvenile salmon work their way down the Fraser River, few of the different species depend on the tidal marshes in order to rear, in order to grow, in order to adapt to future ocean conditions. So they need tidal marshes for a period of time to adapt and get ready. There's a lot of interest these days in constructing new marshes or in restoring pre-existing marshes. And there's a number of reasons for that. People acknowledge more and more that they are critical for wildlife habitat. They also perform a variety of services like wave attenuation, sea level rise mitigation. So there's this really strong interest in building more marshes and restoring marshes, but it's easier said than done. A lot of research done in the estuary has shown that our past attempts at building marshes have not all been successful. Many sites are struggling to remain vegetated, struggling to remain functional as tidal marshes. And so this really led us to the conclusion as there's room to do things better, there's room to innovate, and a part of that is looking at the legacy of sites that have been built historically in the river and learning from them and finding good examples that we can learn from, but also learning from the failures as well so that we can build better marshes and restore better marshes going forward.
These marshes are really important stopover resting and feeding points for juvenile salmon. So we're out here in South Burnaby to study one of the naturally formed marshes of the Fraser River. So the idea is that the exact types of plants that make up these marshes might have a big effect on the types of invertebrates that we see, and that could change the availability of food for these fish. So this is called purple loosestrife that's native to Europe and parts of Western Asia. And it's really common out here in the Fraser River estuary. So the thinking is that as this plant moves in and replaces the native vegetation that occurs in these marshes, what does that say for the prey that those salmon depend on as they migrate through every single year?
Vertebrates are important for a number of reasons. They can be indicators of environmental health, but they're also an important part of this food web. Particularly for salmon. And so looking at prey availability for salmon is an important consideration. We're sampling invertebrates monthly at each of our sites. So what they're doing here, they pull out this core of sediment and then we sift it, looking for small invertebrates that are hiding in the sediment. We're also installing fall trap, which we check and we set once a month. And these capture airborne insects that are essentially falling into the marsh, trying to get as holistic a picture possible of what's going on in these ecosystems and how they're functioning.
Raincoast has been interested in the lower Fraser River and estuary for almost 10 years now. And when we started doing research in the area, we found that the habitat that was available to juvenile salmon was very limited. We started doing research in both the south arm and the north arm, and we found lots of juvenile salmon using the north arm, and most of the habitat that used to exist was no longer available. So we got really interested in both reconnecting habitats that are existing, but then also other habitats that used to exist in this area.
I've been involved with studying habitat compensation sites for nearly a decade here in the Fraser. And one of the things that's come from that work is kind of this increased awareness that we have a legacy of sites across the lower Fraser that are in need of updating, repair, maintenance in order to achieve their intended function. I think what we aim to achieve through this enhancement work is to, first of all, make it more accessible to fish. But when it comes to addressing the invasive species, we're also trying to increase the habitat value of the site as well by replacing an invasive species with Lingby sedge, which is typically the dominant species of marshes of Pacific Northwest estuaries and is highly linked to highly productive salmon habitat.
We are here today at the Woods Island Marsh, which is adjacent to the north arm of the lower Fraser River. And this is one of our newest restoration sites where we're working to improve habitat for juvenile salmon. We're here today cutting the cattail as the first part of the project, which is also going to include reducing the elevation of the marsh, planting new sedge plants, and improving the habitat as well as the access for juvenile salmon, so that overall we can try to actually make this marsh function the way that it was intended when it was first created 30 years ago.
Depending on which type of habitat you are in, there's different times to do the restoration construction projects to reduce impacts on salmon and other fish species in the area. So in the Fraser River estuary, the lowest risk time is in the winter because we don't have millions of salmon migrating past our site. Habitat restoration projects like marsh creation, like habitat connectivity projects, they're incredibly important for allowing these habitats to regenerate, creating opportunities for juvenile salmon and other species to use marsh habitats and grow and be ready to go out in the ocean. If these projects are successful and more of them are created and established throughout the Fraser estuary, there will just be more habitat to support juvenile salmon at a key life history stage so that we can help to rebuild salmon populations throughout the Fraser River.